everybody. We'll start the program. My name is Peter Schechter, and I'm one of the co-founders here at Immigrant Food. And a warm welcome to everybody, for those who come for the first time or those who are repeat offenders here. And in particular, a warm welcome to all of those in the immigration community and our friends at Ayuda, who we always love working with on a number of different things. For those of you who don't know Immigrant Food, let me give you a really short explanation about what this restaurant's about. We do what we like to call gastro advocacy. And that means, in essence, what we do is we serve great food that really celebrates what America is all about and the food that immigrants have brought over the decades to America. But we also try to educate, celebrate, and really advocate for immigrants every day. And we do this in a number of ways. First, we partner with amazing immigrant NGOs that work every day in the trenches with immigrants, like Ayuda, but we partner with 5 of them. We share our space upstairs with them, so if any of our NGO partners wants to use a space to have some type of a celebration or a volunteer training or a English language class, we are very glad to share that space. But we also, in addition to having these types of events, which are somewhat more serious, we also have fun events that we have comedians, we have entertainment, we have musicians, we do cultural events, all around immigrants and what immigrants have brought to this country. We also have a weekly engagement menu, which changes every week, every Saturday, which you can find on, there's QR codes on some of it, and if not, it's the menu that you see inside. We have drinks on the right, we have food in the middle, and we have an engagement menu on the left-hand side, which every week we provide our customers with ideas on how they can engage with immigrants and with the community. And we ourselves publish a monthly magazine called The Think Table about different aspects of immigrations in which we slice and dice, forgive the culinary term, we slice and dice different issues in immigration, whether it is farm workers or dreamers or immigrants and climate change. And every month that changes, and throughout the pandemic, we kept publishing the Think Table, whether or not we had customers here in the deep downtown. My own past is I previously founded the Latin America Center at a big think tank here in Washington, D.C. It was a great job, but I was always banging my head because of the incredibly siloed nature of what think tanks do. I mean, they tend to speak to a small community of experts. And what we want to do here at Immigrant Food is to broaden that community, to bring in people who don't follow immigration every day, but get them interested in one way or another in what immigration is all about, what it's brought to this country, and what immigrants are struggling with today. So today is a great example of the types of things we do, and we're going to talk about asylum in 3 different ways: from a highly personal point of view, from a practical point of view, and from a policy point of view. And we're going to first hear a very personal testimonial before I have the honor of talking with our 3 panelists. And it's a pleasure now to introduce Tensay Kelile, who is a torture survivor from Ethiopia and a member of the TASSC International, the Torture, Abolition, and Survivors Support Coalition. And I'm going to introduce my panelists now because I think then afterwards we'll get right into the conversation. To my right, Jason Dzubow is a nationally respected expert in asylum and immigration law. He's represented hundreds of asylum seekers of all types and from many countries. And his blog, The Asylumist, is the only blog exclusively devoted to asylum law in the United States. In his new book, The Asylumist, How to Seek Asylum in the United States and Keep Your Sanity, Mr. Dzubow has collected his most helpful and popular blog posts, updated them, and sorted them by topic. Lisa Dornell has been a United States immigration judge since 1995 and served at the Immigration Court in Baltimore, Maryland until her retirement in 2019. Judge Dornell has been a guest lecturer at law schools around the nation, as well as a guest lecturer on immigration issues at the National Judicial College. She advocates in her local community for the rights of immigrants and the rights of people with disabilities. Laurie Ball Cooper is Ayuda's legal director. Laurie provides leadership, vision, and support to Ayuda's legal services team across offices and practice areas. She's represented immigrants and survivors of trauma in many capacities. She's fluent in Spanish and Bosnian, Serbian, and Croatian, and that's a special connection with my partner, Teja Ivanovic, whose parents are from Serbia. So I already got them talking in Serbian. So Tensay was forced to flee Ethiopia because he was a leader in an opposition party called Unity for Democracy and Justice, which called for equal justice and democracy for all. Tensay spoke out strongly against dividing Ethiopians against each other according to their ethnic group. He was detained repeatedly and tortured until he finally had to leave Ethiopia in 2014 to save his life. He applied for affirmative asylum in January of 2015, then waited 5 long years until he got an expedited asylum interview in March 2020. But after nearly 18 months, Tensay has still not received a response from USCIS. Please join me in welcoming Tensay.
Thank you. Dear distinguished guests and panelists, my name is Tensay Kelile. I am a torture survivor from Ethiopia. I want to thank Ayuda, Jason, and TASSC, the Torture Abolition and Survivor Support Coalition, for inviting me to speak today. I would like to share my personal story about why I had to flee Ethiopia and how much I have suffered as an affirmative asylum seeker because of the current policy of USCIS, the United States Citizenship and Immigration Service. Like almost 400,000 people who have entered the United States with a visa, I am a part of what is called the Affirmative Asylum Backlog. After I applied for asylum in 2015, I waited 5 years before I finally get an express asylum interview in March 2020. I have waited 1 year and 6 months and still have not got a decision from USCIS. I always cared about making my country Ethiopia prosperous, peaceful, and exemplary for neighboring countries. I got this wisdom from my family, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, and from my own moral and ethical belief. When I was just 14 years old, I was against the military dictatorship in Ethiopia called the DARC. Then I opposed EPRDF, the Ethiopian People Revolutionary Democratic Front, which took control of Ethiopia in 1991. The EPRDF divided Ethiopia into regions based on ethnicity. The largest ethnic group in Ethiopia are the Oromo and the Amhara. I am from the Oromo. My wife is from Amhara ethnic group. I have always been against dictatorial regime divide people according to their ethnic identity. I was detained for the first time in 2007 in a training jail called Backlog, which is known for all the torture that took place there. Then they transferred me to another jail called Cant for 3 months. After I was released, I kept working to make my country better, no matter what the government did to me. This is why I joined an opposition party in Ethiopia called the Unity for Democracy and Justice Party, UDJ. The party's main agenda was to unify Ethiopia with equal justice and democracy for all, and implement liberal economy with peaceful struggle. We also want the government to stay out of the religion issue. About 2/3 of Ethiopians are Christians, 1/3 are Muslim in my country. I had an excellent job working as a procurement agent for major in international companies. I also became leader in the UDG opposition party. I was on the executive committee and central committee member and worked on the economy affairs of the party. I paid high price for my political activism and engagement. I was detained repeatedly and tortured and finally had to leave Ethiopia in 2014 to save my life. I came to the United States and applied for asylum on June 8, 2015. After waiting 5 long years without an interview, I decided to apply for an express interview with the U.S. Asylum Office. After Dr. Abiy Ahmed became Prime Minister of Ethiopia in 2018, many people thought the situation in Ethiopia would be improved. Abiy released thousands of political prisoners, made peace with Eritrea, and allowed opposition political parties to operate in the country. But then conflict among the ethnic groups escalated and it is even worse now. My own son became a victim of ethnic extremism. He was studying at university in southern Ethiopia. One day he was unwilling to join protests organized by ethnic extremist students. So they entered his dorm room and beat him so severely he had to go to the hospital. When they were beating him, student spies sent or assigned by the government in each university as a country that protect people who have been prosecuted because of their political opinion. Last month, I was involved in TASSC campaign to ask member of Congress to recommend that Mr. Mayorkas, the Secretary of Homeland Security and USIS Director Jagu, find a way to speed up interview for asylum seekers who have been waiting over 5 years for an interview. I am happy that 40 members of Congress, led by Congressman David Cicilline from Rhode Island, wrote a letter to USCIS recommending some necessary changes, which Jaso will discuss in detail. I hope USCIS listen to them. Thank you for listening to my story.
Thank you so much, Tensay, for that really moving story. I'm going to ask the audience if they have any questions for Tensay before we start our panel, but I'd like to ask one. What would you say to other people who are seeking asylum? What can you share about your own experiences, and what can your own experiences teach other people? What would you like to see them do so that they would avoid some of the things that have happened to you?
It is hard to share my experience because it is untold, which I have explained this one in a short and precise way. I feel emotion even when I am speaking now. The emotion challenged me, but it needs patience, tolerance, and they have when they are must have to be determinant for what they are need to attain. That is not an easy task. Especially the main problem is USCIS is not have a transparent guidelines regarding asylum. And what I am advised my colleague or who was aspires to apply for asylum to be patient and to go in legal way only.
Is there any questions in the audience that you'd like to ask Tensay? What are you doing now to advocate, to change? Tell us a little bit about your advocacy role.
Already I mentioned on my speech, especially to have USCIS have a clear-cut guidelines how they are operating this work. And the other what I am command is first in, first out, instead of first coming, first in, last out. The way they are making after change in 2018 is a bad thing that creates this backlog for most of what I mentioned, 400,000 people who are seeking asylum. So if they are followed according to the entrance or applied procedure, everybody will get a chance, as well as what I am command the other one. There is another specifically aside a window for a backlog by hiring additional officer to exploit this situation. Thank you.
I'd say thank you very, very much for sharing your wonderful and moving story with us. And I hope everybody will have a chance to chat with Tensay after the event. Thank you. So I'm gonna begin with you, Jason. And after listening to Tensay's story, you know, some of us who are not immigration lawyers, we're civilians. What is this difference between affirmative and defensive asylum, and why did Tensay go in one direction and not in the other direction, and how does that get resolved?
Thank you, Tensay. I've actually got to see Tensay on a couple Zoom calls with members of Congress, and I have to say that a lot of people on the call are very effective, Andrea Barron, other people, but Tensay really is something special. And I think, like the fact that, what has happened is 40 members of Congress have written a letter to the director of DHS and the director of USCIS to essentially say we need to set aside a certain number of asylum officers to deal with old cases, 5 years or older, and to do a certain number of cases in the order that they were filed. So first in, first out, which is how we wait in line in most civilized societies. So he really, I think, was a driving force behind that. He was the most effective speaker, and when people hear his story, these members of the staff and the members of Congress, they really, I think they're very surprised to learn that there's so many people in the backlog and people like him who were separated from his family for so long, who've come to us seeking protection. So the difference basically, and I think a lot of people probably know this, between affirmative and defensive, if a person is physically present in the United States, can you guys hear me? Yeah. Okay. If a person is physically present in the United States, whether they came here legally with a visa, which is probably the majority of asylum seekers, or if they've come here somehow illegally, like snuck across the border and managed to get in without getting caught, they can send in a form to an office and then eventually someday have an interview with USCIS. The system was for a long time first in, first out. In other words, order received. But then in 2018, there was a theory from the Trump administration that most of these cases are fraudulent. And so if they're fraudulent, the way to deter the fraud is to get the people interviewed quickly and then to deny the cases and deport them from the country. So the idea was, well, we'll do the new cases first, and that'll deter people, that'll reduce the number of overall people seeking asylum, which will ultimately help everybody because we're going to go faster for all the cases because there'll be fewer people in the system. Short answer is it didn't work out that way at all. Right now, like, I have an envelope, a literal envelope, where I did this calculation because the government hasn't been very transparent in releasing data, but there's something like 427,000 pending asylum cases in the affirmative system. Some cases have a husband and wife or children. So it's about 680,000 people as of June 30th, 2021. So it's a huge number of people, and I guess Judge Dornell will talk about the backlog in immigration court. But if a person does the affirmative asylum case, in theory, they get an interview, they get a decision, they either win asylum, or if they lose, then they're put into the defensive asylum system, which is the immigration court, which I think Judge Dornell will talk about. So that's basically the system, and it's two tracks. You can apply for asylum affirmatively, or you could apply in court defensively as a defense to being deported from the country.
Yeah.
I wanted to just ask something that's in the newspaper now all the time, which is there's 124,000 Afghans who the U.S. Army evacuated at the last minute from Afghanistan. Many of those are asking for asylum. How will that work in the asylum system that exists today? Already so backlogged, already, given Tensay's story, so delayed. What's going to happen to those?
I think, unfortunately, the short answer is that we don't really know. The majority of the Afghans who have arrived recently have come either with a temporary permission to enter the country known as humanitarian parole, or with some progress along a path to a special immigration status called special immigrant visa, which is available to certain Afghans who worked in certain contexts to assist U.S. government and allies in Afghanistan and who meet myriad bureaucratic requirements to actually obtain that status. And that system was itself plagued by delays, which is why so many tens of thousands or more people were stuck still in the country who could have and should have received their special immigrant visas sooner and been out and safer many years ago. For those who are here now, who are here without any progress along the way to the special immigrant visa, I think we all hope we will see them applying for asylum and see them applying for asylum within 1 year of the day they arrived in the United States, because unfortunately that is what they are required to do to qualify or meet certain exceptions. And officially, as Tensay referenced, there's a policy of last in, first out. So officially, if you've arrived in the United States now and are applying for asylum, the expectation is that you could be scheduled for an interview even within 21 days of them processing your application. But that's not happening for most people. So some people are applying affirmatively for asylum and getting an interview extremely quickly, but most still are not. And so most people are ending up in the same backlog that Tensay is in, and they're facing all of the same challenges of the uncertainty that he spoke to so eloquently, and the separation from family, and the continued danger to family members at home. And unfortunately, I think the number of people in his situation or similar situations is just going to increase, because I don't see any reliable signs that we're prepared as a country to move this along in a much more humane and frankly sensible way.
Let me ask Judge Dornell. I want to get to the backlog in the immigration courts, but I want to get there in a second. Let's stick with asylum. So what happens when asylum seekers get to immigration court? How does that work then?
Well, an immigration court, unlike the proceeding before the asylum office, it's an adversarial proceeding. And the good news for people who have first gone to the asylum office is they've had a chance. And a lot of times when those cases aren't granted at the asylum office and they're referred to the court, people are sad and frustrated and frightened. But the good news is that it is so rare in the field of immigration that people get a second chance. And so when cases are referred to the immigration court, they have a second chance to present their best and most effective asylum case before the court. And so the proceeding starts, as Mr. Dzubow said, some of the proceedings start when people are apprehended at the border. They're served with a notice to appear, which is the DHS's way of making people feel unwelcome. That's the document which tells the people, the applicants, the reasons why DHS is seeking to have them removed or deported from the United States. When that document is filed with the court, that triggers the United States. And the next question is, what relief is available to you? And many of them say asylum, withholding of removal, or protection under the Convention Against Torture. And then the case is scheduled for a hearing on the merits. It's a trial. The Department of Homeland Security has an attorney representing its interest, and in a perfect world, every applicant for asylum has a Mr. Dzubow or Mr. Pilcher, I see you sitting over there, coming into court to assist them. And I don't know if you want me to tell the whole long story about the asylum process. When the duck drops, I'll stop talking. But that is the applicant's opportunity to address some of the issues that might have arisen at the asylum office if they're in court for their second bite of the asylum apple. The judge has a conversation with both of the lawyers and talks about what documents are going to be admitted into the official court record. The applicant for asylum has an opportunity a final opportunity to make any corrections or changes to that asylum application before the real fun begins. The applicant has an opportunity to testify about the reasons why he or she qualifies for protection in the United States. And that's where skilled attorneys and advocates come into the picture, because they know the information that is necessary, the facts that need to be elicited. People have a lot of pain, a lot of information to share, but the lawyers know the facts that the judge needs to hear in order to determine whether or not someone qualifies for asylum under the law. So the applicants testify, and they can call witnesses, and the DHS has a chance to ask questions too. And their job as advocates for their client, the Department of Homeland Security, is to try to poke holes and to address issues that might seem inconsistent or might undermine the claim. But then that's where our superheroes come in again, because they get the last word. They have an opportunity to redirect or rehabilitate and to clarify, help the applicants clarify any confusion or inconsistencies that might have come up during the course of the examination. And witnesses can be called to help support the application of the claim, and then the lawyers, at the discretion of the judge, can make a closing argument. Not all judges wanted to hear closing argument. Sometimes, I see Mr. Pilcher shaking his head, yep, Judge Dornell, may I make an argument? No, thank you. But sometimes the arguments were really helpful, particularly when the cases were close, because closing argument was an opportunity, and it is an opportunity for lawyers to put forth the best and strongest facts and to explain any potential discrepancies or inconsistencies in the case, which might support the DHS's position that the application should be denied. And then the judge has an opportunity to make a decision. In a perfect world, immigration judges would have 3 law clerks apiece and would have days and days and days, not too many days, to make decisions. But requirements are that judges issue decisions right away, oral decisions. And it's a difficult job, which judges take very seriously. And on a good day, when there is good advocacy, and good advocacy can come from both sides, because not all DHS lawyers are evil. Some of them, I would say, do you hear what I hear? Did you just hear what I heard? What are we litigating here? On a good day, judges can grant the cases promptly, and justice has been done.
So, listening to Judge Dornell, it almost sounds like the system works perfectly. But wait. But we know it doesn't. And one of the we did I mentioned the Think Table, this monthly digital magazine that we put out, and we did one on immigration courts, and we talked about the 1.3 million person or case backlog that exists in those courts. And how do these superheroes like you, Jason, and Laurie, how do you prepare your clients to present the best possible case? How do you prepare people to win in this very difficult situation where they've been waiting so long, where the backlog is so long, where tensions are so high. And what about all those people who don't have superheroes?
From my perspective, the hardest part about litigating a case is the amount of time it takes to get it done and the ability to actually carve out the time to do a good job. We're under, and I'm sure this is true for everybody at Ayuda, we're just under a tremendous amount of pressure. There's more cases than we can do. The government, it's not just that they randomly reschedule cases, but they'll sometimes randomly reschedule cases without telling us. I had a case that was set for a master calendar hearing for 2022. Then I happened to look at the online system, which is very clumsy, but potentially usable for someone who's a little better than me. And what I found is, in 6 weeks I actually have a final hearing for this couple, which was an asylum case plus a cancellation of removal case for 2 people. So that was a surprise, and it caused me to put together a whole case that I thought I had a couple years to work on in like a week or so. And so you obviously can't do your best work. And there's a similar problem at the asylum office, which is nothing's going on. All of a sudden, the asylum office now has decided to prioritize Afghan cases. So I got a phone call yesterday. We're going to do 3 of your Afghan cases. And today I was there for somebody's case. Oh, by the way, when we're done this case, I want to talk to you about 2 more cases I want to do. And we want to do this. We can schedule you next week. Okay, these cases are like 15, 20 hours of work just to get ready, not to mention prepping the client for the trial, where you kind of do a practice session with the person, and then spending 5, 6 hours probably at the asylum office, because it's probably the most inefficient office in the government, which is obviously saying a lot. And so, there's no concept of the amount of work that goes into it from the other side, and it seems like a willingness to sort of schedule these things in random ways, and also to cancel them in random ways, which is incredibly upsetting for people who've been waiting sometimes years for their case, and they're expecting a resolution on this day, and you get to court, oh, sorry, you're bumped. We got another case that day. There's another priority over you, or there's no interpreter for you at the asylum office. So these are common occurrences. But to prepare the case is to gather evidence, to talk to the client about, well, what happened to you? Okay, you were attacked. Why were you attacked? Do you have a medical report? Do you have a police document? Do you have a friend who can write a witness letter? We gather up all this evidence. You're required to get evidence under the law, the Real ID Act. You're required to get evidence where it's reasonably available. You put all this together, organize it, check for inconsistencies. Because sometimes your friend writes a letter and says you were arrested on May 5th, 2010, but in your affidavit you were arrested on May 5th, 2005. And that's obviously an important discrepancy. So you have to go through all this and check it carefully, which is impossible if you don't have enough time to actually go through this and get it done. So the conditions that we're working under are very difficult. Sometimes cases actually work. Today I was at the asylum office for an Afghan woman, a journalist who actually was very well known in her country and decided to interview the Taliban without a headscarf on. And it made big news. And as a result of that, she was evacuated by Amnesty International to France and then eventually to the United States, where we did her asylum interview today. So, that's a question of getting all the evidence of that she's a journalist, where she worked. Here's a picture of her interviewing this Taliban guy without her headscarf on and him looking very uncomfortable about it. And so, this is the work that goes into it, and it's a lot of work and it's a lot of time, and when you don't have the time, you're going to make mistakes. It's just the nature of the beast. And so we do our best, and once you get some experience, you have the ability to sort of correct some of these mistakes on the fly, but that's not ideal. Like, most of these cases are won or lost before we walk into the courtroom, before we walk into the asylum office. And so that's how it is.
And I would just add to that Jason did a great job of presenting that sustained and episodic also work of the attorneys in the process. It is sustained work by the clients, by the individuals seeking asylum with us every step of the way. And so I think at the beginning, there's this tremendous effort, hopefully, to build the relationships, right, to get the trust, because in order to obtain asylum in the United States, you are required to bare your soul to the United States government. You are required to share a degree of personal detail that most of us who have never had to go through this process, frankly, can't imagine and would be appalled by. And so it's a sustained effort to build the relationship with our clients at the beginning for all of us, and to help our clients wrap their heads around this process, and to try to prepare them for the uncertainties that are coming, to give them the warning that their hearing could be scheduled on a whim and canceled on a whim, and that we're there for them whatever it is that happens, that we're ready for it, that we've been through that kind of topsy-turvy system before, and so we can at least help them to navigate it. But it is extraordinarily traumatic as a process for individuals seeking asylum to go through, even when they have the best representation in the world at their side.
Just one thing I would add to that. I've talked to many of my clients, and Tensay is a perfect example of this, of people who say, the harm I suffered in my home country, I got through it, and here I am. But the harm I've been suffering for years and years and years of uncertainty and waiting and psychological trauma of not knowing is actually worse than what I suffered in my country. Not seeing my child for 5 years, except maybe by Zoom if you're lucky. Not seeing my spouse. I mean, these are very difficult things to bear. And imagine you're building and building up to this event. Finally, hopefully you have the interview. Maybe it's canceled. Maybe you don't get a decision for months and months. I had a case where it was granted recently, an Afghan man, filed about 2014, 2015, interviewed January 2020. We got the notice, I guess, last week, so I contacted him. I found him by emailed him, okay, you won your case, it's great. He said, it's too late. It's too late. I can't get my family out now. I haven't seen my family forever. It's coming too late. There's nothing to say. He's right.
So, Judge, I know you've been a huge critic of the system, but what can we all do as citizens? What can Congress do if it puts its mind or the man just down the street, Mr. Biden, and all of the administration? What can we do to try to fix the system?
To the Congress and to the man down the street, if you can hear me, you all need to step it up, because justice can't wait. People are suffering. We can do better than this. We have an obligation, a moral and a legal obligation to do much better. People on the ground can keep doing what they're doing, keep applying pressure, and keep raising voices to let the powers that be know that there are people who are waiting, and it's unconscionable to keep people waiting so long. As an immigration judge, it really hurt me to the core when there were shifting priorities. And it is the prerogative of every administration to identify its own priorities, but they have to be cognizant of the effect that has on people on the ground. So one day we're prioritizing family units, the next day we're prioritizing unaccompanied children, all laudable goals. But what about the people who came to the clerk's window weeping, literally crying, because they have been waiting so long for their day in court? We can do better. We must do better. People are entitled to due process of law. One of the things, and this is my passion, and I have to make a disclaimer, I am a member of the National Association of Immigration Judges. One of the things we can do, the same organization that prosecutes people who come into the United States without documents. That means that immigration judges are subject to the vagaries and to the arbitrary pronouncements that come down from different political parties. And I won't share with you my political affiliations, but that doesn't matter. But when political winds change, it should not have any impact whatsoever on what goes on in courts of justice. I was very, very sad when I attended the last Immigration Judges Conference. The Attorney General of the United States stood on a lectern with pride and announced certain restrictions that he was placing on applicants for asylum. I had an opportunity to talk to the director of the agency at that time, and I told him, I don't know who has the Attorney General's ear, but someone needs to tell him that he is listening to the wrong people. Because you don't start with the premise that people who are fleeing persecution, people who are seeking protection, are here to defraud the United States government. That's not where we start. And I'm sorry, I completely forgot the question. What can we do? Well,
You said one thing.
at the state and local levels, we can keep advocating for the rights of immigrants. I had the opportunity last legislative session to speak as a witness in support of some legislation that would provide counsel to unrepresented immigrants in court because the scales are not balanced. You have the lawyer for the Department of Homeland Security, and as a judge, it's jarring to see someone come in on the other side. Immigration law is it's so complicated, even for lawyers, even for judges. It's hard. And so we were able as a group to advocate for passage of legislation that would provide legal counsel to people who appeared in immigration court. We weren't successful because people have different ideas of what justice means. But, if we keep up the fight in any way that you can, talking to Congress people, helping torture survivors, anything that you can do, raising awareness, hosting excellent programs like this. Everybody has a part to play.
Ask my last question before opening up to the audience, a similar question that I just asked Judge Dornell. I mean, what would be the 2 or 3 things you'd like to change and press for change in terms of how the asylum system can be improved? Let me go to Immigrant.
Echoing Judge Dornell, I think first I would flip the system, right? So the premise is wrong. We perceive applicants for asylum as people who have done something wrong. That's how the US government perceives them. Too often that's how the public perceives them, and that is wrong, right? So I think the first answer is to switch the way we see applicants for asylum and applications for asylum to say, these are people filing applications for status to which they are entitled, right? That's the reason it exists, is because there are people entitled to it under the law. So that is the premise. So every application we see, we shouldn't see first as an effort to somehow do something wrong. It's an effort to do something right. And in particular, affirmative asylum applications are the vast majority of the time people applying for asylum, declaring themselves to the US government, putting themselves at risk of being in deportation or removal proceedings that they would otherwise not really be at risk of, because in their day-to-day life, they're not at significant risk of being quote-unquote caught. And so people applying for asylum are taking a tremendous and a heroic risk to declare themselves and request the status to which they are entitled. And so if we stripped away this idea that these are predominantly fraudulent applications and instead approached it from that perspective, I think we could cut out a tremendous amount of the red tape that causes the delay, because we spend too long going down rabbit holes of inquiries that could be answered very briefly, and where there's no reason for suspicion. We run people's fingerprints, we know a whole lot about them. There is no reason to go down a rabbit hole of unfounded suspicion because the government has an itch that people applying for asylum are trying to take advantage of the system. I think that's just not the experience that most of us have with people applying. I think on sort of a more technical levels, there's this 1-year filing deadline. You have to apply for asylum within 1 year of the last time you entered the United States, unless you qualify for a specific exception. That's a terrible rule. It comes from a terrible law in 1996. It doesn't make sense. So many of the people who most need and most deserve asylum are unable for 1,000 very good reasons to apply within a year of arrival. It's an arbitrary thing that creates a ton of extra work in the system. Again, it comes from this premise that everybody's trying to commit fraud, and if we stripped it away, we could simplify the process. We could allow people who are survivors of trauma to access the system much more fairly, and we could streamline adjudication, I think, pretty significantly. And the third thing, there's sort of this whole bundle of law around exactly who qualifies for asylum. You can only qualify for asylum if you have suffered or have a well-founded fear of persecution, which means really severe harm for really specific reasons. And that for specific reasons part is this whole mess of case law that makes it nearly impossible to proceed without an attorney. Which is often nearly impossible to get because there aren't enough resources to fund free attorneys for people who need them. And then even once you have an attorney, it's like hours and hours and hours of time from applicants, from attorneys, and from adjudicators getting twisted in circles about what it means to belong to a particular social group, when at the end of the day, I actually think most of us agree that if someone is trying to kill you because of the family you were born into, that you deserve protection. And if your home country can't protect you and you have come here and declared yourself and are seeking protection here, that should be the end of that story. And it should not take 5 years and a year and a half after your interview to get to the answer to that question.
My wish list is very long, so I'll give it. But I'll start with the technical and go to the less technical. You know, Tensay has been waiting for a year and 8 or 6 months since his interview. In immigration court, that doesn't happen. And so the reason that most of these delays happen post-interview is because of security background checks. And that's a huge problem for people, especially from Muslim countries in my experience, but for lots of people, including from Ethiopia. Why it doesn't happen in immigration court, I don't know. But once I asked the director of the asylum division about this, and he says, well, they have one type of check, we have a different type of check. Okay. Well, I think if Tensay was planning to do something bad, he had 5.5, 6 years down to do it. So, you know, it's not, and I also wonder, and someone mentioned the SIV program to bring the Afghans over, how it was so delayed. Again, security background checks. Well, why is it that an SIV person who stood shoulder to shoulder with an American soldier and potentially had a weapon on him at the time takes 3, 5, 6, 10 years to get an SIV background check, whereas a student who we don't know anything about, who pays full freight to go to George Mason, gets a visa and comes here? That makes no sense. I mean, these security background checks are just nonsensical. They need to be rethought. I guess my one big picture issue, which I've kind of advocated on my blog, is we as a country need to make a decision about who we want to protect. There's been such a back and forth. The Trump administration didn't want to protect anybody. The Biden administration, maybe they want to protect more people. But there's this category called particular social group, which is undefined and is redefined every 6 months. And so I don't know what the hell it is. And, you know, my law partner Todd and I taught for 5 years, and we have no idea what a particular social group is. We taught asylum law at GW, so probably go to a different school. But that should be defined. There should be a definition. We as a country should make a decision about who we want to protect. When a woman comes to the border and says, I'm a victim of domestic violence, or a young boy comes to the border, the gang tried to recruit me and they're going to kill me if I go back to my country. Do we want to protect them? Yes or no? I think yes. But if the answer is no, just give us an answer so we know what to do, so there's some predictability, and so we can make a decision about who we as a country want to admit. And let's have an honest conversation about it. Let's not pretend that all these people coming to the southern border are criminals and terrorists and like crazy people who are coming to steal our jobs and our white women and stuff. They're people coming here for real reasons, and it's not hard to find out those reasons. You go to them and you say, why'd you come here? And guess what? They're going to tell you. And what you're going to hear is a lot of very difficult stories about people who have been suffering real tragedy in their country. So, like, we need to have an honest conversation about who we want to let in. We need to actually make a decision about who we want to let in, and then we need to implement the decision. It just seems to me this isn't that difficult, but unfortunately our democracy is so dysfunctional that the idea that we're actually going to have a real conversation and talk policy and then make a decision seems like not very likely. So I'm hoping that'll happen. That's on my wish list. And then I should make one little plug. If you want to buy my book, there's other ideas in there. It's terrific, brilliantly written, nice cover by a refugee herself, my former client. Also edited by a number of my former clients. But all the profits are going to go to Ayuda. I don't know how that's going to happen exactly. Maybe you can just give the money to Laura. Okay, good. You give the money to her, and I'll give you the book. And that's it. Thank you.
Let me pass this mic to people in the audience. We have a couple of minutes left for questions. So
Don't let her ask a question.
I'm actually going to ask Tensay this question. So, Tensay, as you talked about the plight of affirmative asylum seekers that have mostly been ignored for many years by people in the immigrant advocacy community, by different administrations, and by members of Congress. But now we had a letter that just was publicized today, led by Congressman David Cicilline and signed by 40 members of Congress to advocate for people like you, affirmative asylum seekers. And I want everyone to understand what that means. People who enter the country legally with visas, who have been waiting 5 or more years for their interview, now it's being recommended to USCIS that they be given a greater priority. You help make that change. You. How do you feel about that?
Thank you. Thank you. It is a big job. We try our best to be a good, not for only me. The people, the same to me is, as I mentioned, it is 400,000 people. When they are saying that, they have a family behind them that all is stacked, and it is hard for them, not physically, emotionally, as well as psychologically. Everyone is deteriorated and have a problem. When you are sick physically, may they have sick good, but inside they are not good. I understand that, and these people who was signed 40 are, I think, they put themselves, or they understand the feeling what we are feeling, and I appreciate them. And if they need, if additional advocacy is needed, I'm happy to make my effort. That is it what I am saying.
Jason, you're talking about policy, sort of including, which I think would include people who would disagree with you. I'm wondering, given sort of the tension and all of that that's involved, and the rhetoric that's involved, I think, with this discussion or any discussion about immigration, have any of you had productive conversations about policy with someone who starts out pretty far on the other side from you, and sort of what lessons might you give to us from those conversations?
That's a hard question. You know, I have that conversation with my mom every time I'm in Pennsylvania. And of course, she's a Jewish mother, so you know how that goes. There's only so much I mean, you know, it is hard, especially when you have these conversations with people who you're obviously close to and you love. And they hold a very different, not only set of potential values as you, but also a set of facts which you think are not necessarily facts as produced by, for example, Customs and Border Protection, which is the only office that actually has data about what's going on at the border. Nevertheless, I mean, to me, like, the key to a lot of this is humility and listening to the other person. I feel like you can, like, my life has sort of been devoted to this, like in my professional life at least. And, you know, my mother, for example, sees that. Hopefully she's not watching. I think she does not know how to use Facebook. So. My brother does, so I'm not going to, but he's usually banned from Facebook, so he's probably not watching either. But, you know, I mean, I think you have to listen to what they say. I mean, people have legitimate concerns. I mean, the idea that we're going to, like, open our borders and here's a caravan of a bunch of people who are different color than you, and there are lots and lots and lots of them, and it looks like there's thousands of people invading our country. You know, it's a legitimate concern who's crossing our border. I mean, I think we can't minimize some of these concerns, and maybe they're rooted in ignorance about the people who are coming here because they're not having face-to-face contact with them and talking to them. And so, you know, when a person who's actually one of the actual people gives some testimony and you hear it, that's why it's so powerful. When we're on these Zoom calls, like, no one cares what I have to say. Fine, here's the statistics, and like, yeah, Section 245, I said, well, nobody cares about that. Like, they want to hear what he has to say because he says something really real. He's lived an experience which is not many people know, and it's just so easy to relate to this. Like, I'm not gonna, like, fine, my kids are very difficult, annoying children, but, like, if I don't see them for like a month, fine, that's a vacation. They went to camp. But if I don't see them for 5 years, I mean, you can't even know what to say. Once you're a parent, it sort of hits you like, I wasn't a parent when I started this, and then I became a parent. And the idea that this child is not going to grow up with a parent who's, like, the children need help. I mean, my children especially. But the idea that you can't be in your child's life, and this time it doesn't come back. So, like, fine, like, maybe eventually you'll be reunited. I remember I had a Syrian family. It was a very terrible case. The kid was stuck in Saudi Arabia in the end, with no health care, and he was sick. Finally, we won the guy's case. We expedited everything. We expedited the following 2 joint petitions. Family was coming. I had a friend at the time who was a filmmaker. I said, you know, would you mind if this guy films you, because this would be a good kind of propaganda piece for helping refugees. I said, I can't do it. I don't know what it's going to be like to see my family after so many years. To see my child, see my wife. I don't know what's going to happen. You know, he's right. Again, he's right. And fortunately, in that case, they got together. Terrific. They're doing great. They've been here for years now. They're really doing very well. But you don't know. I mean, a lot of relationships have been destroyed, and really time is gone, doesn't come back. So anyway, that's off the topic. The point is, listen to what people say, be humble, but try to say what's happening and help them understand my lived experiences. I talk to people like Tensay every day, and I know what they're like, and I know how they contribute to our country, and I know how also the asylum system contributes to our country. When my journalist client today had an interview and hopefully will be approved, like, what would it mean if we didn't approve this woman journalist who stood up against the Taliban? What would that mean for our country? What would it say about us? I mean, this is a reflection on who we are and what we value and what we advocate for in the world. Like, would any country respect us if we turned her away? And then how are we going to say, yeah, we believe in democracy, we believe in freedom of the press and free speech and freedom of religion if we're turning away people who embody those qualities? So I think we have to, there's different ways to push this, but I think we have to listen to people's concerns because they're legitimate, but we also have to let them know who the people are who are actually coming here, what they're contributing to our country, and what it means about us.
I just want to say that the portion of your book in which you make that point exactly was very inspiring. I'm on Amazon for in any event. But it is important to have these conversations even when it's uncomfortable. And some of the pushback that I got from legislators, representatives, was to me just shocking when they talked about, these illegals are not ninguna persona es ilegal. People are undocumented, but nobody is illegal. These aliens, we don't call them that anymore. They're here. They're not going anywhere. They are a part of our society. They are an integral part of our society. And you know what? Maybe they don't vote. They're married to United States citizens who might be your constituents. And every policy measure that you adopt or don't support that leads to someone's deportation, that means somebody's rent isn't being paid, somebody's utility bill isn't being paid, someone doesn't have shoes. These are your constituents. So if you don't have a heart and you can't feel the need to act as a humanitarian, think as a politician, because this is going to come back to you. We're all in this big rickety boat together, and you need to be very careful about who you throw out.
We've run out of time. I wanted to thank all of you both for your professionalism, but your passion overall. More than anything else, your passion. Thank you all for doing what you do. And to our friends at Ayuda, thank you once again for joining us and doing this together here with Immigrant Food. And thank you all for coming.